Running Towards Tea Time, written and read by Ariel Arashi. The woods of Wonderland were vast and dark. Twisting trees offered little light, and winding paths brought you in all different directions. They snaked around the area, a shroud of uncertainty within the normally bright world of Wonderland. The animals seemed to stay away from the dark tree lines, and creatures who ventured in were rumored to never come out. There were also stories of paths appearing and disappearing, like the sun in the sky. Some swore some routes never existed. Others claimed they had come one way, only to be unable to return the same direction. Most stayed clear of the woods, finding their labyrinth too hard to navigate. Shuichi was not one such man. He found himself unfazed by the woods. He had lived in Wonderland all his life and knew the forest by heart. If you followed the signs and stayed on the path, you would make it to your destination. His job required him to know that path well, and the young rabbit continued making his way through the murky darkness of the forest. Quickly running, pocket watch in hand and coat-tails flapping behind him, he moved through the darkness, following the path ahead of him. "You know, if you keep running so quickly, you'll soon have no place to go," a voice chided playfully from above, startling the rabbit. Saihara nearly tripped, stumbling blindly before righting himself to address the mysterious voice from the sky. Dusting off his vest and gripping his pocket watch, he looked towards the trees. A quick glance at the treetops revealed nothing to the young man. His ears twitched as they picked up the faint sounds of giggling, alerting him to the presence of another. Unseen, and yet not unheard. "Not all of us have time to be lazing about," he responded calmly to the open air. His ears twitched, waiting for any sound from the mysterious voice he knew so well. A chuckle sounded from the tree line before the voice spoke again. "You're in such a hurry. Where has the Queen sent you to this time? I'm sure it's not too important. The assignments she gives you rarely are." "You shouldn't speak of her like that. It's rather rude," Shuichi chided gently before sighing softly. Crossing his arms and fidgeting with his pocket watch, he continued, "I have nowhere to be at the moment, but staying idle for too long leaves me restless. You know this." "That I do," the voice responded, before making a noise of disagreement. With a click of his tongue, the voice continued, "I can speak of the Queen however I wish. She doesn't control me, and for that matter, I find it frustrating that she controls you. You're like her little errand dog. A bunny." There was another chuckle, this one filled with a bit of mockery. Shuichi narrowed his eyes in annoyance, frowning up at the trees and hoping his less-than-pleased expression met its intended recipient. "I suppose asking you to stay still and think for yourself is too much? Still, I can and will ask," the voice giggled again, playful and closer than before. Shuichi's ears flickered towards the source. He frowned before nervously glancing down at his pocket watch once more. Taking in the time, he gripped the watch tighter before addressing the hidden man once more. "The Queen is a friend of mine. I do not serve her out of obligation, but rather as a friend. Do you intend to heckle me all day, cat?" he asked, a bit of bite in his words as he imagined himself looking directly into the cat's eyes. Slowly, purple eyes materialized and gazed back at him. They blinked once, twice, and then a signature grin manifested above them, a bit upside down. Another playful laugh rang through the trees. Slowly, the rest of his body materialized, hanging languidly from the branches. The man's ears twitched at Shuichi's annoyance, and his tail wrapped playfully around his legs, which were secured to the tree branch above. He smiled as he dangled upside down, taunting Saihara. "Aw, you don't like it when I talk to you?" The man smirked, pulling himself up so he was sitting casually on the branch. Crossing his legs, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes, he grinned. "That's rather rude, you know," he stated. His tail swung playfully behind him as he leapt from the tree, landing gracefully beside the rabbit on the ground. The cat pulled himself up, making a show of straightening out his scarf and back bow. "And here I was going to ask my beloved Saihara for tea, but if you're so bored of me," he trailed off with no hint of actual remorse. Saihara sighed once more, rolling his eyes at the theatrical display of the man in front of him. "Ouma, you and I both know that isn't true. I just don't care for whatever it is you call this." He gestured to the cat and his theatrics. Kokichi's grin widened into his signature Cheshire smile before he reached forward and snatched the watch's chain out of Shuichi's hands. Pulling quickly, he dislodged the golden antique from Shuichi's grip. With a laugh, Kokichi began to run away from the rabbit. He called back playfully, "If you're not so busy, I don't think you'll need this. After all, you can't be late if you've nowhere to be." Caught off guard, Shuichi reached forward to grab the watch back from the cat, missing and stumbling forwards. Taking off after the mischievous feline, he called for the other man to stop. All he received was a chuckle in response as the cat led the rabbit deeper into the forest. Shuichi chased after Kokichi as he ran through the trees. While Shuichi was forced to stay on the ground, Kokichi was light on his feet, scaling a tree and jumping from branch to branch. Quickly, Ouma led Saihara further and further into the woods, and further from any familiar paths. Shuichi continued to run, eyes turned up at the sly cat as he was led around twists and turns. Eventually, the cat began to fade from his sights, leaving only a floating pocket watch to track. "Cheater," Saihara muttered under his breath. The classic laugh rang through the trees as Saihara sped up, determined not to lose track of the cat. The chase continued for several minutes before Saihara came to a horrifying realization. He was being led in circles. Saihara frowned and skidded to a halt, hands grasping his legs as he collected his breath. He crossed his arms and frowned, refusing to play Ouma's game. Slowly, he straightened himself out and waited for the culprit to appear. Within a few moments, Ouma materialized in front of him, pocket watch dangling playfully from his fingertips. "Aw, why'd you stop? I was enjoying our little game," he teased, winking at the winded male. Saihara huffed indignantly before extending his hand towards the cat. "I have had enough of your game. Please return my pocket watch. I need it or I will be late," he said sternly, eyes set on Kokichi. "But I thought you said you didn't have anything to do it this time. Were you perhaps lying to me?" Kokichi asked, a look of betrayal flashing across his face before his trademark smile reappeared. Shuichi watched as he seemed to grip the watch's chain a little tighter, and his ears stood on end. Shuichi shook his head, lowering his hand. He figured Kokichi would not give his watch back until he was ready. "No, I was not lying to you, but I would like my watch back for when I need to leave," Saihara responded calmly. Ouma mused, making a big show of thinking hard before responding. "No, I don't think I will. That is, unless you do something for me. A favor for a favor, right? That's only fair." "Fair? But you stole my watch. Isn't it right to give it back?" Saihara asked, raising an eyebrow at his companion. He frowned as he unwillingly stepped foot into Ouma's game. Ouma's eyes sparkled as if he'd just caught a rabbit in a trap. Kokichi chuckled. "How I came into possession of the watch is another matter." He casually dismissed Saihara with a wave of his hand. Smirking, he brought the watch closer to his face, swinging it back and forth in front of him, tauntingly. "If you want it back, you have to do something for me," he said mischievously. Saihara brought his hand to his head, sighing in exasperation and combing his fingers through his now messy blue hair. "All right. What do you want from me?" he asked, desperate to get his watch back and end this conversation. Ouma made a thoughtful humming noise, over-dramatic and theatrical. "I want tea." "Tea with you," Ouma chimed in a sing-songy manner, quickly pocketing the watch and swinging his legs like a child sitting on a bench. He grinned as he watched Shuichi's face twist with confusion. "What?" Saihara questioned, visibly stunned. "You heard me. I want tea," Ouma pouted, crossing his arms. "After all this running around has made me quite parched. I don't know how you do this all day. Seems like too much trouble for me." "Not all of us can spend our days scheming, Kokichi," Shuichi responded with a shake of his head at the other man's behavior. He once again ran his fingers through his hair, exasperated. Pulling out a few knots, he continued. "Anyways, if you want tea, I assume you've already set something up?" Ouma's eyes lit up and he grinned, falling to the ground to stand beside the tired and frustrated rabbit. With a playful spin, he twirled around, letting his tail brush against Shuichi's arm. It wrapped itself around the rabbit's wrist as Kokichi began to step forwards, pulling him forwards gently. Kokichi then looked back and beckoned for Shuichi to follow him. walking into the woods in front of them. Ouma and Saihara walked in silence, the former slightly ahead of the latter. Stopping at a large tree, Ouma looked back at his companion, tail leaving Saihara's wrist. Shuichi frowned internally, missing the soft fuzz and warmth of the other's tail. Wiggling his eyes before raising his right arm above him, Kokichi gave the other a wink. Bringing it down, the ground rumbled as the tree split in half and revealed a hidden third pathway. He gestured for Saihara to follow him through the tree, jumping playfully over the exposed roots. Saihara followed carefully, cautious of this new path. Stumbling slightly as the ground rumbled once more, he turned around to find the tree had sealed itself once again, effectively trapping them both on their set path. "Most people don't know about that," Ouma said casually, not bothering to turn and face Shuichi as he continued forwards, his tail pointed back towards the tree in indication. Shuichi thought for a moment before dumbly responding, "I didn't know there were more than 2 paths. I've never seen that before." Shuichi mentally slapped himself at that remark. Nervously, he buried his hands in his pockets, expression trailing to lock onto his shoes. "I'm sure you've heard the rumors," Kokichi responded casually. He glanced over his shoulder to look back at Shuichi. Shuichi could feel the man's smile burning a hole in his neck. Raising his head, he replied, "Yes, but I've never seen anything for myself." Mentally slapping himself again, Shuichi bit his lip. Of course he'd never seen anything. These were secret paths, after all. Ouma's laughter filled the path once again, but this time it seemed genuine. The sound was gentle and full of mirth. Shuichi reasoned that it was a pleasant laugh he could get used to hearing. "There's always more than 2 paths," Ouma smiled genuinely, before shaking his head in what was almost frustration. "But most people can't see them. They think the world's left and right, where there are so many more directions. All you have to do is look for those alternate paths. You could go forwards or backwards, even up or down. No one says the world is only left or right. Your paths can have deviations." Ouma muttered aloud, voice dropping into a more serious tone. Shuichi bit his lip, listening to the heavy words fall out of the normally chipper cat. Saihara pursed his lips, letting Ouma's more serious words sink in before the other man spoke again. "But hey, makes for great hiding spots," he teased playfully, looking back and flashing Saihara a wink. All seriousness and frustration were gone from Kokichi's expression, leaving nothing but the charm and a dull shine in his eyes. Shuichi decided it was best not to question it. "How long have you known about these alternate paths?" Saihara asked, genuinely curious. "Long enough, but don't go about telling everyone," Kokichi chuckled before bringing his hands up to the back of his head in a casual gesture. "Actually, go ahead. No one will believe you. They'll think you've gone mad. After all, they think I've gone mad too." The path narrowed before lights began filtering through the dense treetops. Saihara looked ahead at the crack in the tree line, registering the filtering light in front of him. Stepping out from the underbrush, he was greeted with a small cove. The light filtering above was gentle and warm, mixing with the leaves ahead. The area was painted in soft green light, and the grass beneath was dotted with colorful flowers. The middle of the cove held a tea table, large enough to fit a few people, but nowhere near as extravagant as the famed Hatter's table. Kokichi led them to the table, where 2 chairs were already set up. He gestured to the chair closer to them before making his way to the other side of the table. Saihara took a moment to look at the setup as he approached. The china on the table looked clean, and the pot itself let out a little steam. It was obvious that it had been set up deliberately in advance. Shuichi pulled out his chair and sat, moving slightly to accommodate his fluffy tail. As soon as he was comfortable, he was greeted by the sight of his pocket watch flying across the table. Frantically raising his arms, he barely managed to catch it before it collided with his face. The watch jiggled in his hands before it landed safely in his grasp. Glancing up to Kokichi, he was met with a playful grin as the cat made himself comfortable in the chair, legs pulled up and contorted in a way Shuichi could not imagine was comfortable. He watched as Kokichi's tail flickered around to casually grab a teacup in front of him. Reaching towards the table, Kokichi grabbed the teapot with his hands and poured himself a cup before stretching forwards and filling Shuichi's own cup. A devious smile floated across his face as he flashed Shuichi a wink. Looking down at the tea, Shuichi watched the amber liquid move in his cup. Returning his gaze to the cat, He scrunched his face in mild disgust as he watched Kokichi dump at least 3 spoonfuls of sugar into his tea. Cautiously, Saihara reached for his own cup, slowly bringing it to his lips before pausing. Kokichi had yet to drink from his own cup and was intently watching him. "Why are you looking at me so intensely?" he asked, skeptical. "Is this poisoned? Am I to be the victim of one of your pranks?" His eyes quirked in confusion from behind the porcelain cup, bringing the cup away from his lips. Kokichi giggled, bringing his own teacup to his lips with his tail. "It's not poisoned," he responded slowly. "Would I lie to you?" He wiggled his eyebrows but did not drink, smirking from behind his own porcelain cup. There was a twinkle of mischief in his eyes that made Shuichi bite his lip in apprehension. Saihara lowered his cup, frowning. The clink of the cup as it hit the saucer rang out in the quiet grove. "Yes, you would," Saihara responded calmly. "You lie all the time. That's part of your whole deal." "I don't lie so much as stretch the truth. The truth that's already there, mind you. After all, just because something cannot be seen doesn't mean it's not there. Truth can be a spectrum," Kokichi responded casually, pointedly taking a long and dramatic sip of his own tea with a glint of mischief in his eyes. Once he was finished with his drink, he pulled the cup away from his mouth. His tongue darted out to lick his lips, raking over his sharp canines in a twisted smirk. "Once again, that sounds like what someone would say before poisoning them," Shuichi frowned. All he received in response was Kokichi's Cheshire grin and a raise of his brow. Cautiously, Saihara brought his own cup back to his lips. Taking a small sip of the amber liquid, he was pleasantly surprised with the subtle flavor. Kokichi chuckled. "Well, my rabbit, was the tea poisoned? Does it taste off to you?" "If you intend to poison me, I doubt you'd make it so obvious," Shuichi responded casually, lowering his cup. "But if you are asking me how the tea tastes, I think it's quite nice. A pleasant, subtle flavor, though you wouldn't know that seeing as you drown your own cup in sugar," he quipped back. Kokichi seemed to pout at this, muttering something under his breath. All Saihara caught was a word about how the tea was bitter and the tea biscuits were likely the same way. Paying him no mind, Saihara casually reached for one of the small tea biscuits himself. Sniffing it carefully, he was pleasantly surprised to detect a subtle coffee aroma. Taking a small bite, the rich flavor of coffee filled his mouth, though subdued by the pastry itself. Shuichi smiled, just to his liking. "Well, what do you think?" Kokichi asked, observing Shuichi very closely from behind his teacup. "They're coffee," Shuichi remarked. Kokichi snorted and shrugged. "Well, duh. Coffee is your favorite flavor, right?" "Yes, it is," Shuichi replied, taking another bite of the biscuit. "Then you shouldn't complain about things like that. You're happy, I'm happy, and that's it. No more needs to be said," Kokichi remarked, taking another sip, eyes sparkling with joy. He looked quite pleased with himself. The two sat in a comfortable silence for a while, Saihara enjoying the peace and quiet for the moment. He had to admit, the break was a nice change of pace from his normal, frantic mind. Taking the time, Saihara carefully observed Ouma. The other man was still guarded, sitting perched in that uncomfortable position on the chair as he casually sipped tea. It was pleasant, being able to have a nice cup of tea with the kitty. In moments like these, Saihara found the other quite pleasant to be around. Still, Saihara couldn't help but feel there was an ulterior motive to the crafty kitty's tea party. "Why did you bring me here?" Saihara asked, setting down his teacup. The silence resonated through the small grove as he waited for an answer. Kokichi's eyes rose to meet Shuichi's, a flicker of something intense passing through them before they returned to their normal twinkle. "Well, it's tea time," he responded casually. "Hardly worth it to take another tea break by myself, so here you are. Much less boring than some of the others here in Wonderland." He then gestured to Shuichi with his hands. "I mean, you wouldn't have turned me down, would you?" "You really didn't give me the option of turning you down," Shuichi responded, to which Kokichi's ears twitched. "If you had given me the option, I'm not sure I would have accepted," he admitted, to which Kokichi's ears flattened. The other male looked so sad, a drastic change from his usual upbeat cheer. Kokichi made a small humming noise as if contemplating speaking. Before he could open his mouth, Shuichi continued politely. Whatever this little plan of yours was, I don't mind it. I'm just a little confused. Kokichi's eyebrow raised, silently asking Shuichi to continue his train of thought. You say you brought me here for your tea time, and yet everything is so immaculately set up to my preferences. Everything from the tea to the pastries seems so tailored and unlike you. I don't even know how you knew some of these were to my liking, but I do know that they're not your favorite, he mused. Why go to all the trouble of setting up a tea party for yourself, but cater to me? A Cheshire never reveals their secrets, Kokichi responded casually, a smirk in his eyes. Besides, what type of host would I be if I didn't cater to my beloved guest? He asked. A poor one, no doubt. Shuichi shook his head. No, I don't think that's it. I think it's almost as if you're trying to tell me something. Kokichi smiled, his tail setting down the porcelain cup. You're reading too much into this, he grinned, folding his hands together under his chin. I simply desired a partner for tea, and here you are. Nothing more. He then gave a playful wink, tilting his head and sticking out his tongue. No, that's wrong. Shuichi frowned, shaking his head. I don't believe those were your only intentions. A coy glimmer flickered across Ouma's face as he uncurled himself, sitting properly in his chair. His tail brushed casually behind him, ears alert and eyes narrowed. A smirk rested on his face as he spoke. Oh, you don't? Then tell me, Rabbit, what do you think my intentions were? He asked slyly. Shuichi paused thoughtfully before speaking carefully. I'm not sure, but I do know that you didn't just bring me here on a whim. You're right about that, Nishishi, Kokichi giggled, losing the slight danger in his face. Bringing his legs up to the chair and folding them under himself, he casually adjusted himself before speaking, not meeting Shuichi's gaze. I wanted to play with you a little. You're always so uptight, but you always make time for me. So I figured I'd make some time for you. He smiled before raising his head to look at the blue net. You should be honored. My time is very precious, you know. Saihara began before his voice dropped to a soft mumble. Thank you. Pardon? Ouma asked, a look of confusion flashing across his face. Saihara spoke a little louder. Thank you for setting this up. You did this all for me, so I would take a break. I appreciate that, even if your intended method of getting me here was a little excessive. He smiled kindly, bringing his eyes to meet Kokichi's own in an expression of gratitude. His cheeks flushed a bit as the two made eye contact. He watched as Kokichi's face seemed to pinken as well. Kokichi gave a look of stunned silence before he turned his head to the side, muttering under his breath with a hint of fondness. You never fail to surprise me. I'm sorry, did you say something? Shuichi asked, tilting his head in confusion. Nope, you must be hearing things, Kokichi called, pulling his head back to gaze at Saihara once more. He grinned cheekily before breaking out into a boisterous laugh. Wow, you're more far gone than I thought. Look, your cheeks are all red. Maybe we'll have to do this more often. I'd love to see that expression more, he smiled playfully. Shuichi nodded in response, flushing a bit harder at the comment on his cheeks. I wouldn't mind that. This has been pleasant. I enjoyed myself in your company. Nishishi, you want to hang out with a bad kitty some more, huh? Have I really made that much of an impression on you? He teased, sticking out his tongue playfully. With that, he jumped from his chair and slid across the table to perch next to Saihara. With a giggle and a flick of his tail, he made himself comfortable on the table next to Saihara's teacup. Saihara watched him with mild amusement. You haven't been that bad. More like a mild nuisance. Although I have to agree with the cat comment, he said, reaching beside Ouma to grab his teacup once more. Pointedly taking a sip, he calmly drank before setting the cup down next to where Ouma was sitting on the table. Aw, that's the sweetest thing anyone's called me in a long while, Kokichi giggled, swinging his legs and bringing his tail to Shuichi's face. His striped tail curled around Saihara's jaw and landed on his cheek, brushing playfully against Saihara's face. It's almost as if you want to say more. He smiled, leaning closer to the rabbit, small fangs present in his grin. The telltale chime of Saihara's pocket watch alerted him to the hour. Both pulled away from each other as if broken out of a trance. With a sigh, Shuichi pulled out his pocket watch to silence its ringing. "I suppose our time is up. There are things that must be done, and I do not wish to be late," he spoke softly, setting his teacup down and standing up. Straightening out his vest and pants, he checked the watch. On time. Good. Kokichi stood up with him, a smile on his face. "I had fun. It's good to force you to relax every once in a while. After all, if all you do is run, you'll get tired soon enough." He smiled. His tail swayed mischievously behind him as he casually adjusted his pink scarf. "So, where to?" Kokichi asked. "The surface. I'm to collect a package and return to Wonderland," Shuichi responded. Looking up from his pocket watch, he glanced around the area nervously. Biting his lip, he tried to remember the way he'd come from. Kokichi, catching on to his fidgeting, chuckled. "A little lost, Rabbit?" he asked, well knowing the answer. Shuichi began, giving the area a look over once more before conceding defeat. "Yes, I have no idea where we are or where the nearest tunnel is to the surface. If this continues, I'm sure to be late, and for once I was running on time." He gave a dejected face of frustration. "The nearest surface tunnel is that way," Ouma said casually, pointing behind him towards a part in the tree line as his tail flicked in the opposite direction. "Just keep going straight and you'll find a tunnel. After all, you don't wish to be late." "Thank you, Cheshire. I owe you one," Saihara called as he began running towards the tree line. "No problem, White Rabbit. We all have a part to play here. Have fun on the surface," Ouma responded playfully as he waved goodbye, his tail wiggling away behind him, pointing towards the opposite tree line. "And if you owe me, join me for tea again sometime," he called towards Saihara's back. As Saihara retreated into the distance, Ouma's signature grin returned. With a dark chuckle, he mused aloud. "Do you think he'll realize I sent him in the wrong direction? Well, I'm sure he'll figure it out soon enough. After all, you're always running a little late with somewhere to go."